In the 90s, young Elena is listening to music. Years later, a man is frustrated about missing his first vacation in 500 years. He stops Carlos with a stick because he blames him for not seeing things clearly. He gives Carlos a cassette and asks him to keep it safe. Carlos is in the middle of a divorce with his wife Elena. She's busy putting green and red post-its in their house with their names to divide the items. Carlos comes back home and asks her to shut down the music. Since Carlos didn't want anything that reminded him of them, Elena has claimed most of the items. While she thinks he's not very clear for a lawyer, he believes she doesn't listen well for a musician. She's glad that he accepts her as a musician. He ignores that and asks her to sign the divorce papers, where he has given her the house. He asks about her band, the Skates. She pleads with him to let her finish reading the papers and gets annoyed by him chewing ice. He remembers that she found it cool, but she can't stand it now. They start shouting at each other, and Carlos is frustrated about not getting anything in the settlement. She asks him to keep the Mana Band poster because he paid for it. She wants to discuss their situation, but Carlos seems sure they made a mistake by falling in love. She remembers how interesting he used to be. She thinks that's why she only remembers him and no details of the concert they attended. Carlos admits he was looking at her because he thought she was different. He thinks the Cupid got it wrong by throwing them in each other's path. As Elena starts signing the papers, a song starts playing. He thinks there's someone in the house because the stereo is playing, even after he turned it off. Elena comes to turn it off herself, but also gets suspicious when the song plays again. They hide behind the couch and find the guy from the street in their living room. Carlos wants to call the cops, but he doesn't have his phone. The man also keeps disappearing and appearing in different places. He has apparently been doing this for 1,000 years. He introduces himself as Cupid and shares that there are more like him. There's even a Cupid that comes as a baby in a diaper with a bow and arrow. Sounds about right. He knows that a Cupid is never wrong and thinks they both messed up their relationship themselves. He offers to give them a chance to never fall in love. He throws a cube at Carlos, which transports them to a street. He then makes them get in his car and starts driving. He's taking them to the past to prove that he's never wrong. He wants to give them a chance to prove him wrong. From 2024, he takes them 30 years in the past. He brings them to Christina's house party, where they first met. He asks them to focus on the cassette because they'll come back to their reality when the last song is over. They bump into young Elena, who is with her band. Old Elena recognizes them, so Carlos makes some excuse about being jet-lagged. Elena and Carlos claim to know their band from Instagram and assure them that they're famous. Instagram hasn't come yet, so they make up a story about being music managers. They claim to have seen their gig recently, so young Elena invites them to watch their band that night. The old Elena realizes that the Mana concert must be the following day when the party is that day. They're supposed to have their first kiss in the next 24 hours. They plan to change the plot of their story by never having their first kiss and falling in love. When Carlos spots his best friend, Chickless, he follows him around to watch his younger version. Chickless is drinking so he can get a girl, but young Carlos doesn't think it will happen. Chickless reminds Carlos that he's his wingman. He thinks of them like Maverick and Goose in Top Gun, except Chickless compares himself to Tom Cruise. Carlos's girlfriend, Christina, comes to meet him and kisses him. She takes a picture with him and seems too excited. She asks him to hand over some Valentine's candles to the guys while she hands them to the girls. She wants him to save some candles for dinner the following night. Her grandma is turning 90, and her uncle, who is a top lawyer, will also be there. She has told him about Carlos and wants him to meet them. He reminds her of the Mana concert, for which he has VIP tickets. They spot the older Carlos hovering around, so he pretends to be from a magazine and snaps their photo. Christina doesn't want to go to the Mana concert because she doesn't like their music. She thinks if Carlos attends the dinner with her folks, it could make his life better. Carlos remembers that he ended up not going to the concert with her. He reminds himself of the plan and confronts young Carlos again. He tries to convince his younger self that Christina is perfect. He doesn't seem to buy it and gets distracted when Christina calls him to the stairs. She kisses him and starts singing awfully. The older Carlos cheers for her and encourages everyone to do the same. As the young Carlos hugs her, he burns Christina's hair, and Chickless ends up throwing his drink at her to put it out. Young Elena calls for everyone's attention to their band, the Skates. She introduces the older Elena as Katy Berry, who is helping them out. Both the Elenas start performing, and both the Carloses seem smitten. The older Carlos reminds his wife not to let them fall in love. She tries to come in front of young Elena to block his view. She ends up pushing young Elena and burning her hand on the console. Young Carlos rushes to check on Elena backstage and puts ice and a cloth on her hand. Elena asks Carlos to do something because she knows her younger version is about to fall in love. When young Carlos drops his Mana tickets, young Elena gets very excited. She has been trying to get the tickets for a long time. Carlos starts chewing ice, but young Elena finds it cool. The older Carlos points that out, but Elena knows she only called it cool because the younger version of him was smiling at her like that. Young Elena doesn't believe that he might not go to the concert, so he sneakily puts one ticket in her pocket. They hear Christina calling out to him, so Carlos leaves after promising to see Elena the following day. She doesn't understand what he's talking about till she finds the ticket in her pocket. Christina asks Carlos to do something about the lack of music. Elena gets so excited about getting the Mana ticket that she hugs her older version. She seems smitten by Carlos, but her old self suggests that he might have bad intentions. Young Elena doesn't believe that, and even Carlos is offended she said that. Elena reminds him that they need to do whatever they can to change their past. Young Elena isn't worried about the console getting destroyed and thinks they can still make music. The married couple bickers about how they can get her tickets so they don't meet at the concert. Young Carlos gets distracted when he hears Elena taking over the stage and singing beautifully. Carlos and Elena agree that the changes they made to their story are turning out to be even more romantic. They know that if he takes her to the concert, they'll be fighting in a few years. Elena comes with Carlos to the van to retrieve the gun that her younger version had hidden. She explains that they needed to carry one since they worked at night. Elena also wants to make sure that her mini version goes to the concert. She wants to snatch the ticket from Mini Carlos, whose older version has an idea of where he will be the following day. They fire the gun by mistake and notice that only 2 songs are left on the cassette. Elena wants to make sure they don't waste it. Carlos isn't sure if Elena has the talent to be a musician and thinks her passion is being a mom. Elena hates this thought process and that he never understood her passion. She regrets staying silent all this time. Chickless and Carlos don't think Christina will throw a party anytime soon after what happened with her hair. Carlos just remembers how amazing Elena looked as she sang in front of him. They continue playing football cards because Chickless knows Carlos will always be luckier in love than him. Carlos and Elena scare the kids with their gun and ask them to act normal. They ask Carlos for the ticket, but he claims he doesn't have it. His older version knows exactly where it's hidden in his wallet. He also knows a lot of details about Carlos not having money and his parents. Chickless starts freaking out about how much information they have. Carlos asks for the ticket again and admits that he has come from the future to stop him from marrying Elena. Young Carlos doesn't think he'll marry her, but his older self knows better. He knows that Carlos changed his clothes 6 times and spent hours thinking of a dinner place. They try to convince him that Elena isn't good for him. They suggest he should give Christina a chance. Carlos gets scared when Elena points a gun at his younger self and seems very threatening. Young Carlos claims that he could look into Elena's soul when he saw her eyes the first time. He wants to have 1,000 conversations with her and a chance to see her again. Elena keeps trying to convince him that she's not good for him, but Carlos wants to win her over. He begs her not to take the ticket, so Elena comes over to whisper something in his ear. She seems confident about it because she had his baby. She seems sure they won't make each other happy and asks him to hand over the ticket. When he does that, older Carlos also takes the keys to his car. As Elena struggles with the seatbelt, Carlos wonders if she was really going to shoot him. Elena asks him to worry about them having a criminal record in this new life. When Carlos wonders what she told him to change his mind, Elena assures him it's still between them. He's glad to see her smile the way she hasn't in a long time. Elena notices that her ring and the mark on her finger are suddenly missing. They have successfully changed the past and will have different fates now. Elena also doesn't remember being in this car before. As they go through a transformation, all of Carlos's memories with Elena are replaced by his forced relationship with Christina. Their appearances have changed in this new reality. While Elena isn't married and has tattoos all over, Carlos applies a lot of gel to his hair. He has also started smoking a lot while she drinks constantly. They're about to forget each other, so Carlos wants her to know that he saw her as a passionate, brave, and joyful woman. He fell in love with the fire in her eyes that only their son, Carlitos, brought out recently. Since he was the soundtrack to their story, they're glad they're in a different reality now. While Elena goes to her apartment and looks around, Carlos tries to call his home. His late mother answers, so he pretends to be a cop who found her son's car. Carlos isn't home, but his mother seems scared. She wonders if he is a dad too. In the room, Elena remembers that she made the cassette with all the songs right before the concert. Carlos shares that he had a son who passed away in a car accident. He feels upset that Carlitos will never exist now. Elena also panics about forgetting Carlitos and draws what she remembers about him. They realize that they just have one song to change their past again. While young Elena turns up at the Mana concert, Carlos ends up at Christina's place. Chickless gets scared when the older Carlos turns up at his door. Carlos assures him that he's from the future and promises to give him a lot of information about the future of football. In exchange, he just needs to make sure Carlos gets to the concert before it ends. Christina's family judges Carlos for not knowing whom he will vote for and chewing ice. Carlos drops Chickless outside Christina's place and asks him to hand over the ticket. He reminds Chickless that his best friend's future depends on it. Young Elena is trying to find Carlos at the concert and assumes that someone else is him. When Carlos spots Chickless with the ticket outside the window, he kisses Christina to distract the others. They all spot him soon anyway, because he gets scared of a dog and runs straight into their glass window. While he's clearly injured, he still makes sure he hands the ticket to Carlos. Christina warns Carlos that they'll be over if he goes, but he happily takes the ticket. Carlos is afraid to travel with his older self, but he makes him comfortable. He asks Carlos to hurry if he doesn't want to end up like him with gel in his hair. As the last song starts playing, the older Elena turns up at the concert. She isn't allowed entry without a ticket. Carlos drops his ticket when they arrive, but his older version keeps giving him advice. He asks Carlos to give up chewing ice and give their mom a huge kiss when he gets back. He also gives him other tips, but they soon realize he doesn't have the ticket. Elena brings the ticket for him and asks Carlos to kiss her mini version before the last song gets over. As Carlos makes his way towards Elena, another man seems interested in her. Cupid has also turned up there to see how this goes. The older Carlos wants to change for Elena and asks her to follow her passions because he loves her. Before the other guy can reach her, young Carlos taps on Elena's shoulder and kisses her. The older Carlos also asks Elena to make more music and kisses her. They end up in Cupid's car again, and he takes them to their new reality. They're back to their better clothes and hairstyles. Their house seems different and full of awards that Elena won as a musician. They also hear their son calling out to them and rush towards him to the room. Chickless shares how he helped his friend by smashing through a window. The nurse seems to think he's a hero for doing that. With Cupid's stick in the background, Chickless finds love too.